Time to dig into all this IELTS prep, huh? Looks like someone's getting ready to conquer the exam.
You bet.
Before we even get started, I have to ask, academic or general training IELTS? Which one are you going for?
That's actually a really important first step, because those two versions of the test, they actually have totally different purposes.
Right. Makes sense.
So like the academic IELTS, that one's more for people who, they want to go to a university in an English-speaking country, or maybe get some kind of professional registration, stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
But then you've got the general training IELTS, and that one is more geared towards, if you're thinking about immigration, or maybe if you just want to get some work experience in an English-speaking country.
Gotcha. So choosing the right version from the get-go is super important.
Absolutely.
But, no matter which IELTS you end up taking, they both test those same 4 skills, right?
That's right.
The famous 4. Listening, reading, writing, and speaking. The Fab 4 of English.
Exactly. But one of the sources we've got here makes this really interesting comparison. It says getting ready for the IELTS, it's like training for a marathon.
Whoa. Okay, I like that.
Right. So those practice tests, they're like your practice runs, right? Super important.
Yep.
But it's building that overall English fitness. That's what's going to actually get you across the finish line.
I love that analogy. But, it makes you wonder, how do you actually build up this English fitness?
Right.
It's not like going to the gym and working out your biceps,
Exactly. Yeah. It's about consistent effort across all those different areas.
Yeah.
Like one of the sources, it really emphasizes how important expanding your vocabulary is.
Okay, vocabulary, yeah.
And it even suggests keeping one of those like vocabulary notebooks so you're actively learning and using those new words.
Good idea.
Oh, and they actually had this really cool glossary of terms.
Oh, really?
One of the terms they defined, I thought it was really interesting, was lexical resource. Have you ever heard of that term before?
Lexical resource? Honestly, it kind of sounds a little intimidating to me, like something you'd find in like a dusty old linguistics textbook.
Yeah, it might sound a little complex at first,
Yeah.
but actually it's a really key concept, especially when it comes to like how the IELTS is scored.
Oh, interesting.
So basically, lexical resource, it refers to the range and accuracy of your vocabulary.
Okay.
It's not just about like, knowing a bunch of really fancy words.
Right.
It's about being able to use those words correctly, especially in your writing and your speaking. That's something the examiners are looking at very closely.
So, understanding this fancy term, lexical resource, isn't just about sounding super smart.
Yeah.
It can actually help you get a better score.
Right.
Okay, I like that. I like that. So what else kind of jumped out at you from all this prep material?
Well, one of the techniques that I thought was really valuable was this thing called shadowing.
Shadowing, yeah.
Have you heard of that?
I have heard of that, yeah.
Basically, you listen to a native English speaker and you try to repeat what they're saying, like at the same time as they're saying it, mimicking their pronunciation, their intonation, everything.
Yeah, like becoming an English-speaking parrot.
Ha, exactly.
But I've heard it's actually a really good technique, right?
It is. It's incredibly effective, especially for improving your pronunciation and your fluency. It's like a workout,
Yeah?
but for your tongue and your ears. Helps you process and produce English more naturally.
Yeah, and the cool thing is you can find like transcripts for tons of podcasts and TED Talks online.
Right.
So you've got lots of material to practice with.
Tons.
Okay, so we've got vocabulary building, we've got shadowing. Any other standout strategies?
Well, the sources spent a lot of time talking about reading strategies.
Okay, reading. Yeah.
Especially skimming and scanning, they're really crucial for being able to find information quickly in those like longer texts, which is basically what you're doing in the reading section of the IELTS.
Right. Skimming and scanning. I mean, those are things we do in real life all the time, right?
Exactly.
Like, when you're looking at a menu and you're trying to just quickly get an idea of what they have, that's skimming.
Skimming.
Or when you're like, I don't know, looking through a page for a specific name or a phone number or something.
Yes.
That's scanning.
Scanning.
And it's cool how you can actually, apply those same skills to the IELTS reading test.
Absolutely.
So skimming helps you, get the main idea of a passage quickly, and then scanning lets you zero in on those specific details.
And the great thing is, they're not just like test-taking tricks.
Right.
They're actually skills that can help you become a more efficient reader overall.
Yeah, I like that.
So it's a win-win.
So we've talked about like vocabulary and pronunciation and reading. What about the writing section of the IELTS?
Yeah, the writing section.
It seems like that's where things start to get like a little more specific, especially when it comes to that task 1.
Yeah, definitely. You're right about that because task one is actually different depending on whether you're doing the academic or the general training version.
Right. Okay, so tell me more about that.
Yeah, for sure.
What are the main differences? Give me the rundown.
Okay, so for the academic IELTS, task one is all about describing visual data.
Visual data. Okay,
So, like, charts and graphs, diagrams, that kind of stuff.
gotcha.
You have to be able to look at that information and summarize it, like, clearly and accurately.
So it's like, translating that visual story into words,
Yeah, pretty much.
which sounds pretty challenging, actually.
It can be, yeah. It takes practice.
Okay, what about the general training version? What do you have to do for tax 1 on that one?
So, general training task one is more about practical writing skills.
Practical. Okay.
Like, you'll be asked to write a letter,
A letter.
and it could be all sorts of letters, like a formal request, a casual invitation, all that.
Huh. Interesting.
It's really about showing that you can communicate effectively in those different, like, real-life situations.
So totally different skills and approaches then, huh?
Exactly.
You really do need to know which IELTS version you're taking before you even start thinking about, practicing task 1.
Absolutely.
Right. What about task 2? Is that different too?
Thankfully, no. Task two is the same for both versions of the IELTS.
Okay, good to know.
You'll be given like a point of view, an argument, or a problem, and then you have to write an essay in response to that.
Okay,
So it's more about showing that you can develop and support your own ideas,
got it.
in a clear, well-structured way.
So writing an essay, right, makes sense. Now let's move on to the speaking test, which I have to say, the thought of having to, do a face-to-face interview with an examiner,
Yeah,
I'm already a little nervous just thinking about it.
I totally get it. But one thing that I always try to remember is that the examiners are trained to make you feel comfortable.
Okay,
They're not there to trick you or make you stumble or anything. They genuinely want to see how well you can communicate in English.
Right.
That's not goal.
okay, that's reassuring. So can you break down the different parts of the speaking test for me?
Sure. So there are three parts.
3 parts.
The first part, part one, that's kind of like a warm-up,
Warm up, yeah.
You answer some general questions, maybe about yourself, your interests, just familiar topics. It's a chance for the examiner to kind of get a sense of your basic communication skills.
Okay, sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah?
What about part 2?
All right, part two. This is where things get a little more challenging. You'll be given a topic card.
A topic card.
Yeah, and then you have to speak for 1 to 2 minutes on that topic. So it's basically like a mini presentation.
Whoa.
You've got to be able to organize your thoughts, use a range of vocabulary, and speak fluently without, any interruptions.
So like a monologue.
Exactly, a little mini monologue.
And that's pretty scary, I'm not going to lie. Any tips for tackling that dreaded monologue?
The best thing is practice, practice, practice. One of the sources suggests recording yourself speaking on different topics.
Recording.
Yeah, and then listening back. It might feel a little awkward at first,
Totally.
but trust me, it's so helpful for identifying areas where you can improve.
Well, you always say that you used to hate listening to recordings of yourself. What changed your mind?
It was a game changer when I realized those recordings were actually the key to noticing my pronunciation habits, fluency workups, all that stuff. It's like having a personal speech coach right there in your pocket.
That's a really good point. Sometimes you got to face those uncomfortable things, to actually grow.
Right. Embrace the awkwardness.
So we've got the warm-up in part 1, the monologue challenge in part 2. What about part 3? Tell me about that.
Okay, so part three is more of a two-way discussion with the examiner.
Okay, two-way. Interesting.
And it's based on that topic you covered in part two. So it's a chance for you to express your opinions, analyze issues, demonstrate that you can handle a more complex conversation.
So it's like they build up the intensity throughout the speaking test,
Exactly.
right? Starting with familiar ground, then you get that challenging monologue, and then finally you get a deeper dive into the topic.
Yep. And throughout the speaking test, those examiners are assessing your fluency, your vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation,
Yeah.
and, your ability to actually communicate your ideas effectively.
So it's like a holistic assessment of your English communication skills.
Exactly. They're looking at the whole picture.
Okay, makes sense. Now, I have to ask, prepping for the IELTS can be pretty stressful, right?
Oh, yeah.
So did they offer any tips for managing those pre-exam jitters? Stress?
They did. A lot of them actually emphasize the importance of self-care.
Self-care, okay.
Simple stuff, but it makes a huge difference. Getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, exercising regularly, those things can really help you manage stress levels.
Those are really good reminders because, it's easy to forget about those basic needs when you're under pressure.
Oh, absolutely. And one source even specifically mentioned the importance of finding relaxation techniques that work for you.
Yeah.
So whether it's a meditation or yoga or listening to calming music, Taking some time to de-stress can really help you stay focused and perform at your best.
I'm so glad they mentioned relaxation techniques because I think sometimes, we forget to give ourselves permission to take a break and recharge. We just keep pushing ourselves.
Yeah, so it's all about balance, right?
Yeah, balance. Focused effort and then mindful relaxation.
And remember, feeling nervous before a big test, it's totally normal.
Right.
It means you care about doing well.
It's like those pre-game jitters, that athletes get before a big game. They can actually be a good thing
Totally.
if you channel that nervous energy in a positive way.
Exactly. Use it to your advantage.
Speaking of channeling energy, I'm kind of curious about the role of technology in IELTS prep. I mean, we're living in a digital age, right?
We are.
There are like tons of apps and online courses and YouTube channels dedicated to IELTS prep.
So many.
So what did the sources say about all that?
They acknowledged both the benefits and the potential drawbacks
Okay, interesting.
of using technology for IELTS prep. So, on the one hand, you have access to a wealth of resources and practice materials right at your fingertips. It's basically like having a 2047 IELTS library in your pocket.
Okay, that sounds amazing.
It is pretty amazing. But the downside is it's easy to get overwhelmed
Overwhelmed, yeah.
by the sheer volume of information and options. You might end up jumping from one app to another
Right.
without really focusing on any one thing. So it's important to be strategic and selective.
I see your point. It's like having a giant buffet of IELTS prep.
Right.
You could end up with information overload.
Totally. So yeah, quality over quantity.
Quality over quantity. Focus on the resources that really work for you.
Exactly. And one thing that stood out to me was the idea of actually using technology to connect with other IELTS test takers.
Oh, interesting.
So, joining online forums or study groups, that can give you a sense of community and support,
Yeah,
which can be really valuable during that, sometimes isolating process of test prep.
that's a great point because having a support system can make all the difference, especially when you're feeling like those moments of self-doubt or when you're just feeling frustrated.
It really can. It's like having a team of cheerleaders rooting for you.
Exactly, exactly. Speaking of support systems, did the sources talk about the benefits of getting feedback on your writing and speaking?
They did. They definitely highlighted the importance of seeking feedback from others, whether it's a tutor, a language partner, even a friend who's a native English speaker. Getting that outside perspective, it can really help you identify areas for improvement that you might not notice on your own.
I love that because sometimes you just need those extra eyes and ears, right? To catch those things you're just too close to see.
Totally. Maybe you're making a grammar mistake consistently, or you're mispronouncing a certain word, but you just don't realize it.
Yeah, yeah. And even if you don't have access to like a tutor or a language partner, there are all those online platforms now where you can submit your writing or your speaking
Right.
for feedback.
Exactly. So many resources out there.
So technology can connect you with other test takers for support. It can provide avenues for getting feedback. That's pretty awesome. Now, let's fast forward to the big day, the actual IELTS exam. Any last-minute tips, like how do you deal with those jitters?
The sources had some great advice for staying calm and focused on exam day.
Okay, good, because I'm sure we all need that.
First and foremost, they stress the importance of getting a good night's sleep the night before. Think of it as recharging your mental batteries.
Yes, that's so important.
You want to be able to perform at your best.
It's tempting to cram until the last minute, but sleep is like the ultimate pre-exam ritual.
Right. So crucial. Did they have any tips for actually being in the exam room?
Okay, yeah, once you're in there, what do you do? What are the tips?
Okay, so they really emphasized arriving at the test center early. That gives you time to kind of settle in, get familiar with the environment, maybe do some deep breathing exercises, calm those nerves.
Definitely,
They
definitely.
don't want to be sprinting through the doors with your heart racing a mile a minute.
Exactly, exactly. Those pre-exam nerves are bad enough without adding a frantic dash into the mix. So you're in the exam room, you've taken some deep breaths, you're feeling relatively calm. What's next?
This is where it gets really important to pay attention. The sources emphasized listening carefully to the examiner's instructions.
Okay, the instructions, yeah.
Those instructions, those are your golden nuggets of guidance for each section of the exam. And if anything is unclear, don't hesitate to ask for clarification. It's much better to ask a question than to miss a crucial detail.
Yeah, you're right. It's like the examiner is your guide through this IELTS jungle.
Exactly. So pay attention to their directions.
All right, what about pacing yourself during the exam? Any advice on that?
Yeah, the sources recommended maintaining a steady pace throughout. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Don't rush through the questions, but be mindful of the time allotted for each section. It's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance between speed and accuracy.
So don't sacrifice one for the other. Okay, got it. But what if you start to feel overwhelmed or anxious during the exam? Any tips for dealing with, like, those in-the-moment freakouts?
Yeah, it happens. Those test anxiety moments, they can sneak up on you.
Totally.
One of the things they recommended was just taking a moment to pause. Like actually pause, take a deep breath, and just remind yourself of all the hard work you've put in.
Right.
You've got this.
You've got this.
And it's also really helpful to focus on like one question at a time
Okay.
rather than getting all overwhelmed by the whole exam.
Yeah, don't think about the whole thing.
Just take it step by step.
One step at a time. All right, so you've made it through the exam. Congratulations. What happens next? You just wait for your score?
Pretty much, yeah. It usually takes about 2 weeks to get those IELTS scores. But here's the interesting thing. The sources really emphasize that your IELTS journey, it doesn't actually end when you get your score. It's about those skills you've developed along the way and all the doors that those skills can open for you.
I love that perspective. It's not just about the number, right?
Right.
It's about the bigger picture, like what those strong English skills can actually unlock for you.
Exactly. And whether you're aiming for higher education or career advancement, or even if you just want to, connect with people from different cultures, being able to communicate effectively in English, that's a game changer. It's all about expanding your horizons, becoming a true global citizen.
Well said. So true. Like, the IELTS is the key that unlocks the door, but the real adventure, it starts when you actually step through that door and you explore all those amazing possibilities waiting for you.
That's a great way to put it.
We've covered so much in this deep dive, but I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, those IELTS band descriptors.
Oh, yeah, the band descriptors.
Can you remind me what those are and why they're important?
Sure. So basically, the IELTS band descriptors, they outline the specific criteria for each score level from like 0 to 9.
Okay.
They're like a roadmap,
Yeah.
showing you exactly what you need to do to hit that target band score.
So it's not just about doing your best.
Right.
It's about understanding what your best actually looks like according to, like, the official IELTS standards.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because those band descriptors, they don't just focus on like grammar and vocabulary.
Oh, interesting.
They also consider things like your coherence, your fluency, your pronunciation. It's a holistic assessment of your English communication skills.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just about knowing the rules.
Right.
It's about actually using the language effectively to communicate your ideas.
Right, exactly.
I have to say, this deep dive, it's been incredibly insightful. We've covered so much, everything from the nitty-gritty details of each section to, those bigger picture strategies for success.
We've covered a lot of ground.
And don't forget about all those practical tips for managing stress, staying focused, even using technology to actually help you prep.
Absolutely, a whole toolkit for tackling the IELTS.
Right? It's like we've equipped you, our listeners, with everything you need to conquer the IELTS. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with a little something to think about. Remember that shadowing technique we talked about?
Oh, yeah, the shadowing.
What if you use that technique to practice with a piece of audio that actually really interests you?
Now, that's a great idea. It could be your favorite podcast or maybe a TED Talk on a topic you're really passionate about, even an audiobook that just takes you to another world. Exactly. Choose something you love and get ready to shadow your way to fluency. We're cheering you on every step of the way. Good luck on your IELTS journey.